समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा?
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
The political violence that seems to dog the United States of America, even as Trump imposes a tariff war on the rest of the world, was exposed in horrific detail today as one of Trump's closest allies, 31-year-old Charlie Kirk, was shot dead while he was talking at a university campus about mass shootings. This horrific killing was caught on camera. Let's show you those images as we look at the latest volatile incident in the United States of America that really exposes how polarized the country is today. Those are the moments when, caught on camera, Kirk, while addressing a university gathering in Utah, is shot by a gunman who is still at large. The shooter is still at large, and ironically, he was being asked, Charlie Kirk was being asked a question about gun violence as the gunshot came. Trump has called him a martyr. This volatility in America points to a larger America that is deeply divided, deeply polarized, and some might say, including Americans, deeply unstable. Of course, all of this is happening as Trump's tariff wars, if we can move to those images now, Trump's tariff wars are being inflicted on the entire world, including India. After a period of extreme tension between India and the United States of America, we have now seen Trump's sort of ginger moves at some sort of patch up. Trump took to social media to announce that trade talks were resuming. He called the Prime Minister a very good friend. The Prime Minister reciprocated with a sort of similarly worded comment to Trump's hand of rapprochement or reconciliation. But there was just one problem. Just hours ago, the Financial Times reported that Trump had in fact urged the European Union to slap 100% tariffs on India. The question now is, an unstable America, an unpredictable Trump, and of course a China that India cannot and will not trust. What does India's strategic reset look like in times like these? I want to welcome to the program our newsmaker today. Sushant Sareen is with us. He's one of India's finest strategic minds. He's at the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you, Sushant. Let's start with the day's news. America wakes up to this horrific caught on camera assassination of Charlie Kirk, one of Trump's most vocal supporters, pointing once again, I think, to how deeply divided the country is, the levels of political violence that seem to dog it. When you saw those images, what is the first thing that you thought?
But it was quite shocking, actually. The footage was pretty dramatic. The way Charlie Kirk, when the bullet enters and the blood spurting out, it was quite ghastly, actually. And then, of course, this is a university campus. My kids have gone to university there, not in the US, but in Canada. And I can tell you, I'm not really surprised by the kind of atmosphere I've seen on campuses in the West, the kind of rhetoric we see on social media or in the news media, what the stories I hear from my kids. I am actually not surprised. And in the US, it's particularly bad because it's a deadly cocktail of hatred, political polarization, and guns. In India, again, we have a lot of polarization, a lot of hate speech and stupid speech which goes around. But thankfully, we don't have guns. As a result, even when somebody takes a machete and tries to massacre somebody, the damage is in a sense limited. In the US, it's much more. We see the school shootings. There is clearly a mental health problem in the United States. There are sociological issues which are coming in, and most of these issues have been ignored for the longest. And then on top of it, you have kind of political polarization in which nobody is blameless. It's very easy to blame the right wingers for the kind of pushback that is coming from them and the kind of language some of them use, which is pretty obnoxious. But liberal extremism, which at one level is an oxymoron, is also a reality. You see that everywhere. This entire cancel culture has been brought in by the liberals, that you don't want to hear the other side. The Western countries were famous for dissent. Western countries were famous that you could say anything, provided there were certain parameters. You could not threaten anybody, you could not preach violence, but other than that, everything intellectual debate was free. But look at the UK today. I haven't seen a more fascist state than the United Kingdom, where even if you retweet something or you agree with a particular position, you can be imprisoned. How crazy is that? At least, Barkha, you and I are contemporaries. When we were growing up, this was not the scene in the West. There were some pretty spirited, debates which used to happen out there. The kind of movies that used to be made had some really stark debates in them. And yet the world was not set on fire. That's not the situation today. You are afraid that, and I'm not saying that everything Charlie Kirk said was right. In fact, there were many things on which you could disagree with him. But the way to argue out that is to come up with a better argument and a more compelling one, not to kill the guy. And then when I see a whole lot of very well-heeled, apparently, kids going to fancy colleges like New York University and what have you, maybe your University, Columbia, actually defend or just very nonchalantly look at an assassination like this and say, well, he had it coming. It makes you wonder where that society is going. I think those images were distressing, but what followed was even more distressing.
In so many ways, I think, in so many ways, we're looking at the end of American exceptionalism, if it ever existed, if it ever was a thing. Certainly, America's claims to its own exceptionalism, Sushant, have really been called out. I want to now move to the larger overview of the strategic environment for India. We have essentially a deeply polarized, volatile America, a volatile American president. And we have a volatile American president suddenly, hours after the FT reports that he's urging the EU to slap 100% tariff on India, talking or declaring that trade talks between India and the US have resumed. And the Prime Minister responded both on Truth Social, which is the social network Trump prefers, as well as on X. And just hours before that was this headline in the FT, which is on the screen, saying that he wanted EU to play along. EU has resisted that, of course. I'm just saying, how should India be making sense of this America, this president, this geopolitical environment?
So, Barkha, let me just say something on that American exceptionalism thing. Look, none of us were fooled by the fact that America did not do nasty things around the world. Regime change, invasions, all kinds of things, right? But the American exceptionalism actually came from what you might call, and probably that's dumbing it down a bit, the idea of America. The lofty ideals of the state to which everybody aspired, at least on the face of it. They all, paid lip service to that particular thing. And that is what actually led to American exceptionalism, apart from everything else, the power of the dollar, the strength of the US armed forces, all of that aside, the soft power of the United States. But it was that ultimate idea, that, look, America is a country, anybody can go, you work hard, you pay your taxes, and you can become a billionaire within a generation, right? That, there was something very seductive and very attractive about that particular idea. I think that's gone out of the window. So to that extent, yes, American exceptionalism in that sense is certainly over. But when you are a hyperpower of sorts, exceptionalism in many of the other domains does not go so easily. To come back to the trade question and what is happening, the kind of strangeness that we are seeing, the lack of consistency, the kind of disruption which we are seeing. Look, it certainly affects countries like India, partly because we are now far more integrated with the American, ecosphere, if you might want to call it that, than what we were maybe 20 years back. We are more dependent on the American economy. We have greater interaction with them at a strategic level. There's been a connect, and suddenly we see that reset which we had done post 1990, when the Cold War had ended, and we had kind of moved away from that non-aligned pro-Soviet kind of a position to a pro-American, pro-Western kind of a position, and we've done that pretty smoothly. That thing is now up in the air. Can we really rely on it? Is it dependable? Is it durable? That particular reset which we had done. So are we going to make another reset, or will we pursue this particular path a little longer? It was easier for us to decide in 1990, 91, when the Soviet Union collapsed, because there was really nothing else on the table at that point of time. China was nowhere on the scene in the sense it is today. Today, you have a far more contested world, and your choices become that much more complicated. Your options become that much more limited. So that is one part of it. Now, on the particular issue of what Trump is trying to do, look, nobody can decipher what Trump is trying to do. But let me try and attempt. One is that they are looking at relations with India on two parallel tracks. One is the trade track. So they are saying that, look, okay, fine, we imposed a 25% tariff on you. The trade deal has not gone through. We will talk about trade and let us see if we can come to some kind of mutually acceptable, mutually beneficial trading arrangement. Parallelly, there is the other 25%, which is linked to the Russian oil purchases and the pressure which is being put on countries like India for buying Russian oil or having close relationship with Russia. I don't know whether these are being de-linked or they're going to be clubbed together. Nobody really knows that right now. Because at one level, you think that, they will be part of the same package deal. But when Trump, talks about India, and then when the FT report comes, you think that maybe these are going to be on parallel tracks. So one is that question mark. Again, how much should we trust a particular newspaper report? Because sometimes newspaper reports lose nuance. But having said that, I think there could be something else at play. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part. See, what has Trump been trying to do? He's been trying to get a deal on the Ukraine-Russia war. He, at least on the face of it, ostensibly, seems to be more inclined to take the Russian line and say, okay, fine, let us accept the reality as it is, rather than what we want it to be. The Russians have a strong position on no foreign forces in Ukraine. The territories that the Russians occupy, they take. There will not be a very, very strong military force in Ukraine, but there will be some kind of security guarantees given. That package deal. He's probably inclined to accept it. Problem is that neither the Ukrainians nor the Europeans are ready to accept it. So what is Trump trying to do? Maybe, and like I said, this could be wishful thinking. Maybe what Trump is trying to do is he's trying to force the European hand. And he's trying to tell them that, look, you want us to take action. You want us to be the top dog. How about you putting in your own share? You are the guys who are also buying Russian oil. You stop doing that and you start penalizing countries like India and China, on which the Europeans are just as dependent as the Americans are. Maybe on China much more than they are on India. So move in that direction. So he's forcing the European hand, and maybe in the hope that the Europeans will balk, and then the Americans can tell them that, look, you guys are not ready to put in your share. So let's strike a deal and let's try and move forward from here, because otherwise, we are all getting caught up in this morass, which is the Russia-Ukraine thing. Yes, it's unfair on Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine will get the short end of the stick, but just too bad. Let's move on rather than getting stuck in this particular thing, because then this distracts us from some of the other greater contests that we need to enter into. And maybe that is also at play at somewhere along the line. Even that is at play. But even if supposing that was to happen, it still does not solve our problem, because now that we are trying to put our relations with the Chinese back on the rails, and we've had a bitter experience with the Americans, even though the Americans are an extremely critical partner as far as India is concerned for the foreseeable future. How are we going to balance the America versus China issue? It was easy till 6 months back, because we saw China as an adversary. China was not really nice to us. So we could take a position one way. And that was a much more comfortable position for us to take. But now that we've started making an outreach and the Chinese are making an outreach to us and vice versa, are we simply going to say, okay, fine, now that we are getting back into embrace with the Americans, to hell with the Chinese? I don't think that's on offer anymore. I think it is in our interest to have some kind of a modus vivendi with China. I'm not saying that we'll solve our problems with China. Certainly not. And I'm certainly not saying, in any case, I don't believe in this whole trust business. But I'm certainly not saying that there's certainly, a lot of love and all of the milk of human kindness which is overflowing in our hearts for China. None of the stuff. But purely on a realist platform, do we want to have an adversarial relations with China? I don't think that's necessarily in our interest. So what we would want to do is, again, do the tightrope walk, which is exactly what the Americans are doing vis-a-vis Pakistan. So when they start investing in Pakistan and say that, look, we are dehyphenating India and Pakistan, we are dealing with Pakistan separately, we are dealing with you separately, maybe we can also say that we'll dehyphenate the United States and China, and we'll have a certain relationship with the Chinese, and we'll have a certain other relationship with the Americans.
So let me ask you this. Jeffrey Sachs, who's of course a Trump critic, he was saying to me just yesterday, he said Prime Minister Modi should not get taken in by Trump because there's no stability in Trump's responses, point one. Point two, he said, look, if you feel China is a kind of patron saint for the Pakistanis, the Americans are also cozying up now to the Pakistanis, and the Americans have had a long-standing sort of engagement, transactional as it may be, with the Pakistani military. And today you see, or in the last few hours you see, the US State Department, in some other context, describing Pakistan to be a close ally, right? So I think that this is a very peculiar situation where, from a strategic point of view, you have China's interests in Pakistan and you have the Americans playing some sort of game in Pakistan, whether driven by Trump's business interests there, whether driven by some other calculation. So how do you see that? How do you see both China and America kind of playing Pakistan to contain India?
Look, I think I'm not entirely sure whether the relationship they're developing with Pakistan is to contain India, or the impact of that relationship will be to contain India. Those are two separate things. Maybe in the case of the Chinese, it was the design was to contain India. Maybe also with the Americans, but let's wait and see how that unfolds. But remember one thing, Barkha, after 9/11, the Americans had given Pakistan the status of a major non-NATO ally. I don't think that status was ever taken back. The Pakistanis continue to enjoy that status. So technically, when the State Department says that Pakistan is a close ally, they're not wrong in that sense. Of course, America had lost interest in Pakistan after the abandonment of Afghanistan, and maybe they are reviving some of that interest. But how deep is that interest going to be? Do the Pakistanis really have the kind of critical minerals that they claim they have? there have been estimates going around for the last 30, 40 years. Pakistanis come up with these over-exaggerated kind of claims about how, they are the richest country in the world, how they have all the resources in the world. Nothing has come out of that. So I'm not entirely sure of how much those claims are really worth. One. Secondly, purely from an economic angle, what does Pakistan bring to the table? Pakistan's geo-strategic location was relevant at one point of time vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. Then it was relevant vis-a-vis Afghanistan. Today, will it be relevant vis-a-vis Iran? But will the Pakistanis go whole hog in siding with the Americans on Iran? It's one thing to get into some kind of surreptitious activity to sponsor Sunni terrorist groups like Jandullah along with the CIA and others, and try and do something in Iran, but nothing beyond that. But will they go to the next level? I am a little skeptical on that count, because the Iranians also then can stir up a lot of trouble inside Pakistan. So there is that factor. What else does Pakistan bring to the table? The Americans are already got bases in the Middle East. So there is nothing that Pakistan brings to the table on that count, that it becomes, an important military base. Is it to deny China? But can Pakistan deny China when China wants to, really get its pound of flesh? Can the Pakistanis deny it, given the kind of dependence they have on China and the suspicions they have of the United States? And then on the whole terrorism issue, Barkha, remember, today is September the 11th. How much are you hearing about 9/11 today? 5 years back, everybody was geared up, Jor and my community was talking about 9/11. How much have you heard about 9/11 today? You are hearing about Charlie Kirk, you are hearing about Russia, Ukraine, you are hearing about what the Israelis have done in Doha, you are hearing about China. How much are you talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc.? It's there, it's a problem, but is it the great strategic problem of this era? I don't think so. So there are certain limitations, at least to my mind, there are certain limitations to what the Americans can do with the Pakistanis. So maybe there will be some kind of a differentiated approach between Pakistan and India. But that's not really going to go down very well with India. It was one thing while the Americans were present in Afghanistan and our relations with the Americans were blossoming. We could ignore some of the stuff that was taking place vis-a-vis Pakistan. But are we going to be doing the same thing now? I'm not entirely sure. I think it will only add to the level of suspicion and distrust of the Americans now in the Indian establishment. So I don't see how that Pakistan question will play out between America and India. And then, of course, on the China issue, again, call it an instinct. Maybe I'm joining some straws in the wind. But at least on the economic plane, I think the Chinese have lost interest in Pakistan. And the irony is that some of the Chinese projects of CPEC are now going to be funded, or at least the lead funders in some ways are the ADB, which is part of the World Bank, IMF ecosystem, right? So it's the American financial cloud, which is now going to be coming to fund what were essentially Chinese CPEC projects in Pakistan, because the Chinese have lost interest in that. And the Chinese have said,
but then why was China so keen to support Pakistan in Operation Sindoor?
So that is on the economic level. On the strategic and the political level, I think the relationship pretty much remains in place. But I would imagine that there are going to be certain strains that will come in that if the Pakistanis were to get closer to the Americans, especially on things like critical minerals and stuff like that, I think there would be some amount of disquiet in the Chinese. They will not say it publicly. Publicly, it will be all weather friend, higher than mountain, deeper than sea, sweeter than honey, stronger than steel. All that flowery language will be used. But just look what exactly is happening between Pakistan and China today. The Chinese were the biggest funders of Pakistan, the biggest investors in Pakistan. How much investment has gone into Pakistan today from China? In the last 3 or 4 years, there are virtually no new loans that the Chinese have given to the Pakistanis. Virtually no new. They've rolled over some of the old loans. There is no new investment coming in. Some of the most important projects of CPEC have not come through. The Chinese are pretty, miffed about that. And that is why they've said, for example, on that mainline project, this railway line which is supposed to come up, it's like what I believe a $7 billion project, maybe even higher now. The Chinese have said there's no financial closure, so they are not getting into it. And they've said you bring in other partners, which means that in a manner of speaking, the Chinese have lost interest. There are no Chinese investments, private sector investments, major ones coming in. Whatever investments had come in, they are not getting the returns for that. There are delayed payments. In fact, it cost Shahbaz Sharif something like $300 million when he went for the SCO meeting to China, because there are about $1.5 billion that the Pakistanis owe Chinese electricity companies, and that has been pending for a long time. So जो हमारे यहाँ पर नहीं होता, that very often we do के okay Barkha, I owe you some money, you take 20%, then we'll talk about the rest later. This is how the Pakistanis are operating now, right? So they've given that 20% कि अच्छा जनाब थोड़ा सा ये change ले लो, उसके बाद की बाद में देखेंगे types. So this is what the financial and economic part of the relationship was. When CPEC came in 12 years back in 2013, 2014, the idea was that there is a very strong strategic relationship between the two countries, but let's give it an economic dimension also, so that this relationship will become watertight. It is not that anymore. And now, then there are pressures, because the Chinese are saying that, look, our people are under threat. Just look at, very interestingly, Shahbaz Sharif meets President Xi, and both sides issue their readouts of that particular meeting. Xi's readout specifically mentions the security of Chinese working in Pakistan. Shahbaz Sharif's readout simply glosses that over, right? That is one. Secondly, there is this demand, long-standing demand from the Chinese that, look, you let us bring our own security into Pakistan. The Pakistanis are balking on that. And then, of course, there is this whole issue. What happens when Gwadar does not pay for itself? The port is already there, but no ship goes to Gwadar anymore. Maybe 4 or 5 in a year, maybe 10. So the port is dysfunctional. How does the port pay for itself? And you made an airport out there where no flight lands. So it's something like Hambantota, right? There's an airport in which no flight comes. There's a port in which no ship comes. There's a cricket stadium, again, Hambantota model, where no match is played. Maybe 1 or 2 PSL matches. Who cares about that? Anyways, but nothing else, right? So you have a serious problem where somewhere along the line, the Chinese are going to say, okay, fine. Now let's discuss how you're going to be paying for this. Will the Americans step in at that point of time? We don't know. Will the Chinese double down on what they are doing? I don't think so. Will they want that, let us use this particular port for some military purposes? There is a lot of talk in the air. Whether that happens or not, we'll have to wait and see. I don't think the Pakistanis will find it easy to go along with that. But what are the options they have? So by and large, what I'm saying is that it's a pretty murky kind of a strategic scenario which we are seeing unfold along our borders. And that is not necessarily a good thing for us because it means there's a lot of...
And here's my question on just India and China. I get what you're saying that, it's not going to be so easy for Pakistan and China anymore from a Pakistan financial dependency point of view. But now you're saying that in a way, a lean towards America isn't going to be that distinct anymore, I'm imagining. You haven't used these words, I'm using them. If not, if we are going to continue to pursue our own sort of independent rapprochement cautiously with China, There are a few things that are still of concern. One is that we are not entirely back to status quo ante. We're not entirely back to status quo ante if we benchmark it against a pre-Galwan phase. Two is you've explained China's maybe diminishing interest financially in Pakistan, but that China has blocked UN resolutions by India against the Jamaat-ul-Dawa, that China has not just given weapons platforms to Pakistan, but actually used them to borrow from the Indian army the phrase borrow as a borrowed knife, wherein the army said we weren't just fighting Pakistan, we were fighting Pakistan and China. How do we move forward with these security concerns?
मेरे को एक चीज बताओ, when we started our engagement with the Americans and improving, we've always had an engagement with the Americans, but when we started scaling it up, it was not as though the Americans were not allies of the Pakistanis or were not supplying weapons to the Pakistanis and were not assisting the Pakistanis. The Americans were also not weighing in India's favor against terror groups which were operating in Pakistan. In the 90s, the Khalistani terrorists and the Americans kept quiet, the British kept quiet, all of these guys kept quiet, right? People were getting butchered in India, they had nothing to say for it. Come to Kashmir, the Americans did try to turn on the screws at one point of time on the Pakistanis, but then again stopped. But by that time, Pressler Amendment had come, so the relationship, was not exactly in the pink of health. But the Americans never really leaned entirely in our favor and continued to supply the Pakistanis till as late as 95, 96. They were, there was that Hank Brown amendment where they were giving them weapon systems and stuff like that. Then later on, during the war against the Taliban, the last 20 years, the war on terror, as it was then called, they were giving them all kinds of long-range BVR missiles, all kinds of other equipment the Americans were giving to the Pakistanis. Did that stop us from getting into a closer relationship with the Americans? During the Kargil crisis also, it was the Americans who actually ultimately, told the Pakistanis to back off. They were telling us initially, but we didn't listen to them. So the pressure went to the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis, because they were losing very badly, decided that they will make a virtue of necessity, and Nawaz Sharif went and backed off, right? You were very active that time. You know what I'm talking about. So look at the Chinese right now. I think it is unreal for us to expect that when Op Sindoor happens, it was not as though we were in some kind of a love fest with the Chinese at that time. We were trying to put our relationship back together. We were trying to, revive that engagement process, but it was a very slow process. So the Chinese and the Pakistanis have been very close. To expect that the Chinese will not be helping the Pakistanis, I think is unreal. And it might happen even in the future. I'm not negating that possibility. That will entirely depend on what is the kind of relationship we develop with the Chinese, which is why the dilemma for us will be that, there are other bigger players than us in the market now. The Americans will play footsie with the Pakistanis. We'll play footsie with the Chinese. The Chinese will try and see what they can extract. So like I said, it's not, the diplomats in India will have their task cut out for them. And then finally, look, the way I look at it, Barkha, and maybe I'm being very optimistic on it. Maybe I'm being unrealistic about it. But if I was a Chinese guy, I could look at this situation in two ways. One way of looking at it is that, look, my primary contradiction today is not India. Okay? The gap between me and India is too much. Yes, I would like to have good relations with India, but my primary contradiction is the coming contest with the United States. And in that particular contest, if I have countries like Russia and India not hostile to me, in fact, in a sense, either neutral or even doing business with me, isn't that better than to push these countries into the American arm? Because this then complicates my strategic scenario. So let me deal with the Americans. And what is my problem with the Indians? There are some border issues. Maybe we can do some give and take. There have been plenty of proposals in the past. Even some of the confidence building measures which we have signed, Barkha, including the one which says that settled areas, as far as settled areas is concerned, there will be no change, right? Something to that effect. I don't have the exact language. Arunachal is a settled area, right? But there are parts of Aksai Chin which are not a settled area. And in any case, some of our claims in that Aksai Chin area now, I hope I don't get, traitor, this, that. But some of our claims are not quite tenable. Okay? And people who've studied this issue will tell you that. Some of our claim lines are not tenable, just as some of the Chinese claims lines are not tenable. So can we reach some kind of an understanding, arrangement, agreement, call it what you will, use the diplomatic lingo, at least insofar as the border question is concerned, so there is a stability out.
Right. So I want to, sorry, I lost you there. I can't hear Sushant suddenly. Yeah, Sushant, complete your point.
Yeah, so I said, if you can sort out that border part, a lot of other things start falling in place. That again does not mean that, everything will be hunky-dory between us and the Chinese. No, there will always be problems.
Yeah.
These problems become much more manageable if the mother of all problems is sorted out. That is one way. But allow me half a minute to tell you what could be the flip side of it. The flip side of it would be, the Chinese could just as well think this, that look, okay, fine, the Indians are probably the only guys in the region who can stand up to us, or who have even shown the gumption to stand up against us, right? They were able to do it much more because they thought they have the Americans on their back. The Americans have now alienated them, right? They've really pissed off the Indians. And the Indians don't expect the Americans to come on their path. And in any case, Donald Trump is not going to fight anybody else's wars for them. Okay? So this is the time that we bring India under our thumb, and we make sure that these guys don't rise. So they could, instead of being accommodative, they could actually become more bloody-minded about it. I think that possibility also exists. So I don't know how the inscrutable Chinese are going to behave, but let us wait and see.
I think that's fair. We simply don't know. I want to end this conversation where I started it, how we should respond to Trump. The Prime Minister has, of course, reciprocated, once Trump made that announcement. But given how Trump's officials talk, right, even if you say, chalo, maybe the FT didn't know the truth, you have Peter Navarro basically going crazy every day, using a word like vampires for India and China and BRICS nations. You have the the Commerce Secretary saying India will say sorry one day. You have the Treasury Secretary also talking about tariffs by EU being desirable. How do you think, in conclusion, India should handle Trump?
One is the strange thing, and it's really strange because normally, it is the people who deal with military affairs, strategic affairs, who speak this kind of language. People who deal with economic affairs have a much more subdued and much more accommodative language. But nowadays, on the Indian side as well, we have a bull in China shop approach with some ministers, and the kind of statements they make about our partner countries. And the same thing we are seeing as far as the American system is concerned. But look, I come back to the fundamental point. There are a lot of problems as far as India and the United States are concerned. We don't know whether the trade deal will come through or not. But let us not forget that America is a very, very critical country as far as India is concerned. It's not a Pakistan that we can say, screw them, they can go to hell. It doesn't matter to us. They bring nothing to the table. There's a lot that comes to our table from the Americans, right? And I will certainly not adopt that cavalier attitude that you will see among a lot of people. 2% of GDP, 4% of GDP, little realizing 4% of GDP is a hell of a lot of money. And it impacts millions of lives in India. So, you can't have that cavalier approach, which is why you see the government, at least at the Prime Minister and his closest people, taking a very, very sober, calculated stand on how we are going to deal with the Americans. There are certain red lines, which I don't think any government in India, both for political as well as economic reasons and politico-economic reasons, there can be no real compromises on that. But there could be certain other adjustments which could be made. Now, if you can manage that, then I think to keep to stick to your guns, but adopt a much more forthcoming attitude with the Americans is the right way to try and approach this issue. And this issue will not necessarily go away once Donald Trump is out of office. You don't know what is going to replace him, right? How do you know JD Vance will be any better or Marco Rubio will be any better? So we don't know. But we have to try and maintain this relationship for whatever it is worth for the foreseeable future, which is why if it means that you have to keep quiet, you have to keep your counsel, you behave in a sober way, to try and make sure that this relationship just does not get completely derailed, and try and keep moving forward to the extent you can. I think that is the only option for us, unless, of course, the Americans want to completely burn the house down, in which case you have no option. Your options are picked out for you by the Americans, in which case you will suffer a lot of problems, but you will have no choice but to readjust and reorient yourself. What that reorientation will be is something else. Just one last point. This bravado that we show, we look for other markets. It's not so easy to get other markets. Developing markets takes a long time. It's not something which happens in a few weeks, a few months. So there will be very, very torrid times for us. But I don't see how we have any option but to go through that phase if the Americans actually want to shoot this relationship in the head. They've shot it in the foot already, but whether, these days you never know with the Americans and, their craze for guns, they might suddenly want to shoot the relationship with India in the head. Then all bets are off.
Yeah. Many balls up in the air. We also have a volatile neighborhood with what's happened in Nepal. We have a volatile American president, and we have a China where the intent and motive is not fully revealed to us. Those are some of the images out of Nepal. Before we let you go, thoughts on that? First Bangladesh. Actually Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal. It's like India is. You've got, there are days when you wake up and you say, thank God I'm Indian. And honestly, I thought that is so, actually there's no day that I'm not thankful that I'm Indian, but there's some days you're especially thankful to be India, to be here in our own country. When you look at what happened with Charlie Kirk, when you look at what's happening next door in Nepal. Must talk about the neighborhood before we let you go.
I couldn't agree with you more, Barkha. Again, but look, in all the three countries that you're speaking about, and let's not forget Pakistan, they've had their own turmoil and tumult out there when Imran Khan was ousted. And then, people came out in the streets. But again, that is Punjab, and Punjab is the most Hudu place in the world. They never fight anybody completely. What
do you mean? We are a fighting clan, our side of Punjab.
Our side of Punjab is different, but forget these guys. They always give in to the superior force. So let's not talk about them. But I think it's in all the three countries, the circumstances and the organic conditions were created by malgovernance, by bad administration, rampant corruption. And politics had become a kind of a cesspool, whether it was Bangladesh. And the tragedy is that politicians are people, Barkha, more than you and me. Politicians are people who should have an ear to the ground. They should be able to feel the pulse of the people. They should know what is sticking with people, what people are talking about, what is bothering them, and take corrective measures. That's the whole idea of a democratic system, right? That you rule with the consent of the people. When you suppress that and your entire focus is on palace intrigues like in Nepal, or family politics like in Sri Lanka, with the Rajapakshas running riot, and in Bangladesh, again, Sheikh Hasina losing the plot by saying that, okay, I will now be president for life or prime minister for life, right? There are pressures that start building up, and because you have bottled up the system, that pressure will explode somewhere. In the trigger in Lanka was economic, in Bangladesh was political, and in Nepal was again, the crowds came out because suddenly that one outlet for dissent, which was social media, was suddenly clamped down. Now, were other players involved? Were agent provocators played a role? Did other vested groups, deep state, a lot of people, when they want to sound very profound, use the word deep state had come. So was the deep state involved? Which deep state? I don't know, but some deep state was involved. Suddenly people are saying China was involved, but Are Baba, Oli was China's pet yaar. Why would China want to oust him, right? So the point is the organic conditions were created by the governments and their bad governance, their corruption, their nepotism. And then all that it needed was a small trigger. The problem with these countries is because they are smaller in size, it is easy for this kind of thing to happen and governments to be toppled. In a country like India, it's so damn bloody big. Kahan se hoga? It's not that it hasn't been tried in India. In India, again, I don't think the farmers' movement was as benign as many people make it out to be. I don't think the CAA protests were as benign as many people make it out to be. And yet, we tided over many of those crises.
And argued another way on the farmers' protest. The government did not try and curtail that protest. It allowed that space for that protest to happen, and it took back the laws. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the laws, there was that sense that public order, maintaining the center of your sort of body politic was way more important than a debate around the laws.
Right, Barkha, on the farm on the farm protest, I couldn't agree with you more. Again, I am one of those who believe that those were fabulous laws. Those laws should have been there. The government should not have withdrawn it. Let me confess. But at the same time, I understand where the government was coming from. I think there was an understanding that, look, if you stand on ceremony and the prestige of government, you will exacerbate the problem. So doesn't matter if some people don't want these laws. The government will lose some face. It doesn't matter. The country is more important. Political stability is more important. So let's withdraw these laws. Maybe there will be a time, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, when these laws, will become, people will ask for these laws. At that point of time, we can bring them back in. So again, I think the lesson of the farm laws was don't ram down laws,
That's right.
in the way it was done. Please develop a consensus when you're trying to bring about a tectonic change in how things are going to be working. Look at GST. I don't again agree with how they've brought in the GST and how they're administering it. But the fact that they did it with consensus, they brought in all the states, they've taken everybody's consent. I think, even if there are what's and all in how the GST plays out, at least you have the consensus of the country. That is the way to go about it. And perhaps next time you bring in farm reforms, you should follow that particular course. Take all stakeholders into account, give it somewhere, take somewhere. And that is what, but I think it was a wise decision to take back in retrospect, wise decision to take back the farm laws, wise decision to let, people vent their fury during the CAA protests, and then clamp down when it was required, but at least avoid the kind of massacres which we have seen in places like Nepal and Bangladesh. So I think that old thing which could be done in the 70s and 80s of police firing on crowds, on lawless crowds or on mobs, you can't really justify that anymore now.
And a good,
So
and a good,
lessons in
and
that.
and a good thing too. I think as I said, there are days that you say that the miracle of India is that with all its diversity, its size, its scale, its challenges, it still remains almost an oasis at this point in South Asia. And when you look at what's happening in America, you have to thank your stars that as you said, the gun culture is something that has remained extremely alien to us. I think we watch in absolute shock that this still carries on in America. Thank you, Sushant. That was a masterclass in geopolitics. We could go on. You have one last point. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just one. Two things actually. One, I think what is happening in India, or the relative stability in India, is a miracle. Second, I think the guy I really want to thank is that astrologer who picked out the time that India should declare independence. Because at the end of the day, I think the guy has turned out to be right, in the sense that at least things have been a lot more stable in this country than and there are smaller countries around the world who marvel at the sheer magnitude of this place. 1.4 billion people. Delhi is as big as bloody Canada.
Yeah.
So they have no idea of the magnitude of India. And when people pontificate to India, just look at them that guys don't know what the hell you are talking about, man. But and thank God we are part of this miracle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sushant. Great talking to you, and talk to you again soon. Take care. See you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.